just wanted to tell you all how excited I am for our next speaker and for the information that she's going to provide for us. Had the opportunity to speak briefly with her yesterday as part of sort of some preparation, and it was fascinating subject material, stuff that I, as a kid who dreamed of maybe going to space camp someday, having the opportunity to hear from someone at NASA. What an opportunity we have. So as I mentioned, next we're going to be hearing from Dr. Karen St Germain, the Division Director of the Earth Science Division in the Science Mission Directorate at NASA. She provides executive leadership, strategic direction, and overall management for the agency's Earth science portfolio, including a fleet of 24 satellites that are currently viewing our home planet from space. And she's joining us to discuss NASA's partnership with agriculture to adapt to changing water cycles. Please join me in welcoming Karen St Germain.
All right. Thank you so much for that warm introduction, and it is a thrill for me to be here, meeting with you all today. I've learned so much already this morning and hope to learn more over the course of the day. It may be a surprise to you to see someone from NASA here. Most people, when they think of NASA, they think of the moon or Mars or the James Webb Telescope or those missions that get a lot of press. What a lot of people don't know is that we take that same technology, engineering, scientific know-how and turn it back to study our home planet for the purpose of raising standards of living and around the world. So, and it is my great pleasure and frankly the honor and thrill of a lifetime to actually be leading that effort for NASA. So since I took the job a couple of years ago, I have been really trying to educate myself on what NASA can do to support the agriculture industry. I've not ever been part of the industry myself, although I've lived in places around the country and been surrounded by agriculture in various ways. But one of the things I think I understand is that agriculture is a data-driven business at every level. And NASA is a data agency, a data and information agency. And so there's a natural partnership here. So just a couple of things that we already do today that you're probably familiar with. We build and fly the Landsat satellites, as well as missions like the Global Precipitation Mission and the Soil Moisture Mission. And these data already find their way into products that you're probably familiar with, the WASDE report, the Drought Monitor, and those kinds of things. So we're already providing some information to the agriculture community today. But what I wanted to really talk to you about is how we should be proceeding in the future. We know that we are seeing dramatic changes in our Earth system. And actually this unique vantage point of space gives us the ability to see the entire Earth and how it works as a system. And we know that one of the impacts of climate change, with a warming climate, is an amplification of the water cycle. And in general, this isn't universally true, but in general, we're seeing dry regions getting drier, wet regions getting wetter, and we're seeing more extreme weather. And the image in the lower right here is actually a before and after of the derecho that passed through Iowa. We think crop models are one of the really important ways that we can bring together what we know about the broader environment and where it's heading, and how that might play out in agriculture. So this is one of our focus areas, and I'll show you some of the results of this in a moment, but this is where we can bring together environmental observation and prediction with genotype and management practices to help us think about the kinds of challenges we might be facing in the future. So this is NASA's Earth Observing Fleet. It's 24 different missions. They are looking at the atmosphere, precipitation, clouds. They're looking at the surface, soil moisture, vegetation stress, that sort of thing, as well as the oceans, the temperature, sea surface height, and so forth, and even the ice in the polar regions. And one of the important things to really understand is this whole, the whole Earth operates as a system. So what happens in the Arctic actually affects our weather here in the lower 48, for example. And it's through the eyes of these satellites that we can see how all of that is playing out. And those observations give us the ability to understand, and we can capture that understanding in models, and it's those models that give us the predictive capability. So one of the things that we're seeing is, again, I mentioned the intensification of the water cycle. So all of the water that we use to grow food and support life on land originates in the oceans, gets delivered to us by the atmosphere, and we're seeing that cycle intensify. Largely, that's because our oceans are warming. The oceans are absorbing about 94% of the extra energy that's trapped in the Earth system. That warming is creating more intense weather cycles. So we can, oops, let me go backward here. This was supposed to be an animation. I guess it's not going to work. Well, one of the things that we can see from our satellites, and this is by measuring changes in the Earth's gravitational field, is changes in root zone and groundwater. And if this were playing out, you could see these patterns shifting over the last, I think it's about 20 years in this animation. And the thing to note is that the areas in dark red, those represent events that we would have expected to see on the order of once every 50 years. But we're seeing them much more often now. So let me zoom in on California here. Let's see if this animation works. There we go. So here we're looking at terrestrial water storage in California from the period 2002 to 2022. And you see a fair amount of annual variation happening there, but you also see a downward trend, and you can sort of pick out years of drought here. But these are the kinds of observations that can help us see below the surface and manage our resources more effectively. So, you know, the scientific data and the models, that's all great, but how do we get it into the hands of, get actionable information into the hands of folks who could use it? We call these applications, you might call them tools. One of them is OpenET, and this is a tool that we rolled out about a year ago. It's down at the field level, and it's intended to help quantify water that was used by a field. And then, of course, if you know, if you've got a good estimate of water that was used by a field, and you know how much was applied, you can begin thinking about how to tune water usage. This is an example of a tool where we brought multiple models together. Just like in your weather forecast, you often hear the weathermen talk about ensemble forecast. There are multiple different kinds of models that we use in weather forecasting. They all have different strengths and weaknesses, but it's the ensemble that actually we find gives you the best forecast. Well, similarly, there were a variety of evapotranspiration tools, but this represents an ensemble and a freely available tool for folks to use. All right, let's see. Yeah, there we go. Now, I talked earlier about crop models. This is a case where we developed crop models for corn and soy. So corn is in yellow, soy is in green. The vibrancy, the intensity, is related to the predicted crop yield. And this is a retrospective. So what we did was we took genotype and management practices that, and we got those at the county level, but then we merged them with our environmental record to predict what we think the yields should have been in these years. And then we compared that to actual yields to validate the crop model. In fact, the last panel just talked about the importance of validating these models. You saw, by the way, in this animation what probably looked like artificial boundaries, and that had to do with the fact that we were dealing with county-level data. So those boundaries represent the county boundaries where information changed. Nonetheless, this validation of the model then allows us to say, all right, now let's take our models that project into the future, the climate conditions we think we're facing, and see what those tell us about yields. So what you're looking at here are crop yield projections, and I want to be really clear, this is not a prediction. This is just a running forward of the future models, assuming we make no changes in genotype and no changes in management. Of course, we will make those changes, but this gives us a way to see how the changing earth environment alone would affect crop yields for wheat and for corn globally. I'm going to run this over again. Oops. Let's try to run it over again. Come on. Maybe we can't. There we go. What you see, and again, I don't want you to focus on what this model says 80 years from now, but just in the next 10 to 20 years, you start to see real stresses in these crops, particularly closer to the equator. The difference between the way these crops respond to the changes in climate have to do with both temperature and water. And how the crops themselves use carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Some crops benefit from that more than others. And that's the kind of thing that we try to capture in these models and then run out into the future. So, and I think this is my last graphic, this is just a view of how we sample the Earth on a minute-by-minute basis. Each dot on here represents a data point that is coming into the NASA Earth models and helping us understand the evolving Earth system. So we're always looking at our home planet, and we're looking for better, more effective ways of getting the information we see into the hands of people who could use it to inform their decisions moving forward. And that's what we're here to talk about. And so with that, I think what we'll do is move on to questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Would welcome the opportunity to have you join me over here for a conversation. Join all of you for a conversation as well. If you have questions for Karen, please feel free to submit them via Slido. Look forward to everyone's inputs. But I know that one of the things that you said was that you're really looking to get a dialogue going with the agriculture industry. Tell us what you need to know, et cetera. I mean, I also understand that there has been dialogue already between you and some of the nation's farm groups. What have you learned at this point about, what NASA could be doing to help better provide data for American agriculture?
Let's see if we're working here yet. No.
Yeah, they say it's working.
Oh, is it working? Oh, there we go. Okay, great. Yeah, it's a great question. So just a few months back, we had a lot of discussion with the larger commodity groups, particularly cereal crop folks, and they talked a lot about wanting to get our results down to the field level. And one of the things that we're doing with future NASA systems, including Landsat and others, is to try to get to better spatial resolution on our information products, but also we need to broaden beyond the results that I showed you here, and we are starting to do that with crops other than corn and wheat, other than the big ones. So that's a couple of answers.
Yeah, because you showed a lot of your modeling involves the corn and wheat and some of the Midwest row crops, but does NASA have plans to expand to some of the crops that might be a little bit more familiar in this neck of the woods, your romaine lettuces, your almonds, things of that nature?
Yeah, in fact, we just published a result, actually this came up in the last panel too, on processing tomatoes and what we see in terms of stresses for that crop. But a lot of this modeling work is done by a group called AgMIP, and this is the group that's trying to advance these these particular crop models, and they are already working on a variety. And I wrote down some notes because the list was so long, but cereals, oil crops, tubers, fiber crops, nuts, as well as energy crops, fruits and vegetables, and I'm dropping all my cards here, specialty crops and so forth. So, but the trick is there that we've got to get the models themselves to be more advanced and more and validated, and that's really where we could use the partnership, particularly with industry, frankly, to get those crop models up to where they need to be. And then, of course, our magic comes when we can link the crop model with our future climate models.
Well, and that was kind of going into my next question, because you talk about wanting to know what producers want to know. So aside from the wish list, what can American agriculture do to help you and help NASA out in this endeavor?
Yeah, so we are just starting. In fact, the competition is, the submission of these proposals is just closed and we're doing the evaluation, but we're just starting a consortium that will be domestic agriculture focused. So today we have an agriculture consortium called Harvest. It has a global focus, which of course includes domestic, but we learned over the last year that we really needed to increase our domestic focus. So that new consortium, and we expect we'll award that contract late this fall, perhaps early winter, that will create the consortium that can bring together our scientists with members of the community here to tackle particular questions. So that will be a $15 million contract. It'll run out over 5 years to bring together folks from the science community and the ag community to go after some of these problems.
One of the questions that's been submitted asks about what at all NASA is doing at the moment on terms, you showed crop and corn and wheat, excuse me, but a lot of folks are wondering about animal agriculture as well. What can be done to analyze grassland availability, water availability? What's NASA working on that front? Yeah,
it's a great question, and all the same data apply to pastureland management. So same sorts of data sets in terms of water availability, groundwater, as well as vegetation health and vegetation stress. So same kinds of tools can also inform pasture management.
Another question asks, and you touched on this a little bit with some of the modeling that NASA is doing that ends up in USDA reports, but wondering kind of on a deeper level what relationships NASA has with existing entities like USDA, the California Department of Food and Agriculture, on down the list.
Yeah, so a couple of really exciting things to talk about there. We did just sign a new agreement with USDA to, we have been collaborating with them for a long time, but of course they've got new programs that are associated with climate adaptation, and so we're partnering with them on those. And then we just signed an MOU with the state of California, including the Department of Food and Agriculture, that will focus on a California-specific information system. This appears in the recently signed budget. It's an $18 million a year line item in the budget, and it's a partnership between NASA, various agencies in California. The UCLA is the principal university partner, although there are others, as well as Esri. The idea there is that we want to get the data and information into an ArcGIS format so that it's easy for people to use. So that's a new area of focus. It extends beyond just agriculture. It will also support a number of other climate-driven challenges in the state. But yeah, a number of new partnerships for these issues in particular.
Another questions submitted asked kind of I'm going to broaden the question out a little bit because the question asked specifically about the risk of public disclosure of water use on the part of individual landowners. But just wondering, that, but also generally, how does NASA approach some of the personal, private property issues that could be at play with spatial analysis like this?
Yeah, so also a great question. So we, all of the data that we collect are free and open, but in the case of OpenET, it's really, that's estimating the water that the field used, not the water that was applied, right? So, so it's not, there's no disclosure of water use in that sense. But we generally don't have proprietary data that comes from individual fields, although we've begun a conversation with several producers who say, hey, we would like to explore ways of sharing data if you could protect it and if it could help you improve the tools that we then get to use. So we're starting some of those conversations now, but most of the data we use today comes from the county level.
We've got, looks like just about 10 minutes left in our conversation here. I would encourage all of you and all of you watching us online as well to continue with your participation. One question that I found interesting, wondering about the best resolution availability that NASA has right now and whether or not its work is publicly available in the event that agricultural startups might like to utilize this data in developing new technology.
Yeah, so let's see. So each mission we fly has different spatial resolution, and that's driven by the technology that's embedded in that sensor. That said, with each new generation, and we are just starting to build the next generation now, technology is enabling us to move to higher spatial resolution, better temporal repeat, and we're really pushing in those dimensions. All of the data, NASA's policy is all of our data are freely and openly available. The trick is, how do we make it easier to use? And we're investing a tremendous amount in that area through what we call our Open Science Initiative, which is about getting all of our data and the processing code and the information about the data out in the open as we're doing the science. So earlier in the process, and that's to build transparency and to, frankly, build partnerships sooner with the people who could make use of the data. In terms of individual mission spatial resolution, the best thing to do, instead of me rattling those off here, is to say, if you go to nasascience.gov and then click on Earth, you can quickly get to all of our missions and specific details about them, or we could take it offline.
The resolution, I'm sure, is very good in all circumstances, though. I'm sure. Yes. Another person wondering about the grand solar minimum and the effects that you envision that might have on agriculture.
Oh boy. Well, let's see. I'm not sure. I don't think I have a great answer for that, but I do. Yeah, I don't think I can answer that one here, but I would like to take that offline to our ag team and see what I can learn and get back to you on.
Okay. Very good. So one of the things that you and I have discussed kind of prior to this conversation is just the broader subject of bringing more crops online, more analysis online. And I know there's a lot of variability that would come into play in this question, but if you were to add another crop to your analysis, what's your lead time before you have actionable information on which to use? I mean, because I understand there's probably a lot of production practices you have to account for, the genotyping that you mentioned. What's the time frame on all of that?
Yeah, so a lot of those models for a variety of crops, there is a model that exists. It's a question of, is it good enough? Is it well supported enough? Is it validated? So the answer varies a lot depending on, from crop to crop, depending on where we're starting. But I think the answer can be, on the order of months, depending on what question we're trying to answer and with what fidelity. And that's one of the things that we always try to do is quantify, when we can, the fidelity of the projection.
One questioner asks about the issue of urban encroachment, and that being such a big issue depending on what part of the world you're in. I know it's a big issue for folks in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. as well. But wondering what level of analysis NASA might be able to offer on the impacts of former agricultural land transitioning to a more urbanized environment, the old dirt versus concrete conversation. What do you have available to us at this point?
So a lot of the information that we have on that comes from the Landsat series. It's a 50-year record of land use, including urban lands, wetlands, and so forth. So we do have that record, and of course now we're building the next generation Landsat, and we're trying to drive the spatial resolution even higher. So we can show you how that has played out. But I'm not sure did I get to the heart of your question, or were you asking?
Well, yeah, and I think you're getting there, but just the general subject of, as potentially ag land gets lost to urbanization, what kind of analysis can be done about water use, water storage, water loss, things of that nature, as those conversations continue.
Yeah. So I mentioned Landsat gives us the record of how we have used land. We have had the groundwater measurements not for that full 50 years, but for the last 20. So we can do correlative analysis to understand those relationships. I don't know of any particular results off the top of my head, but it's an interesting question, and I can also take that one back to the team.
Another person asking about NASA's ability to measure water use when it comes to water applied to the irrigation of an actual crop, as opposed to water applied to the irrigation of a cover crop, which is planted at a separate point in time to better hold moisture at a number of different reasons, not as predominantly used in this part of the country as they might be in the Midwest. But is there availability to differentiate between water uses on the same acre, or is it a singular number that can be applied on the part of NASA?
Yeah, I think the answer to that would depend on the spatial resolution. So what size of the fields, and as compared to the spatial resolution of our observations. But certainly we could design experiments to actually answer particular questions along those lines, and that may be a really good experiment to run using our data.
Mm-hmm. Another person wondering, you mentioned this data is fairly open, but are there any kind of safeguards to protect it from falling into the wrong hands? Is that even possible with open source data like this? And any thoughts there?
Yeah, so again, we do make all of our data openly available. One of the things that we do take very seriously is safeguarding the integrity of the data. So we want to make sure that when we serve out NASA data, people know that it is authentic data. It's calibrated, validated, and reliable data. But we don't establish any barriers to who can use it.
And there's been a couple of questions submitted on the subject of climate change, and we have 2 minutes left here, so I'm giving you plenty of time to answer this one. But I'd be facetious, of course. But on the general subject of NASA's analysis and climate change, how do you think that can be an asset to agriculture, both in the U.S. and around the world, as it works to adapt to climate change and adapt to the factors that climate change is presenting?
Yeah. So look. The climate change, and everyone in this room knows it, is a daunting national and global challenge. That said, I'm optimistic because we have technologies, information, and communities of people that are connecting in ways that they never have before to rise to the challenge. And so I think the view that NASA data provides of domestically, but also globally, can actually inform our decisions in a way that makes us resilient and against the changes that we see ahead. So that's really a motivating factor for us. It's our whole team working every day to try to get what we know into the hands of people who can use it to better inform their decisions. So I think this global view that we get from space is really critical to making decisions both locally and globally.
So looking to offer a global view, but looking for maybe ground level information to help sustain that global view. A lot of interesting things discussed here over the last 45 or so minutes. And Karen, we appreciate you joining us to share all of that with us.
Thanks so much.